Welcome to today's episode of Selling the Cloud podcast. Today, we are honored to be joined by Toni Hohlbein, CEO and co-founder of Growblocks, a funnel analytics platform that gives visibility across the full funnel and uses that data to predict revenue performances quarters out. Today, we will be covering three main areas: the full funnel visibility and its impact, lessons from factories, discussing what B2B SaaS players can learn from the factory operating model, and the role of digital twins in business. Toni, please share a brief overview of your career and your life journey leading up to being a guest with us on Selling the Cloud.
Thanks very much for having me here. Thank you so much. So my journey really, the interesting part really, I think, starts like a little bit, over a decade ago. Joined a startup, was one of the first 7-8 folks on the ground. Did all kinds of stuff that you do when you're below 10 people in terms of company size. And very early on, as the company grew, basically started building this revenue operations function. Back then we didn't know yet that this is what it was, but this was the first inklings of revenue operations, and this was 2013, 14 or something like this. I then took this very untraditional path of becoming the CRO of that organization. It was around 15 million in ARR. Spent 3 years in the US building up that market, and then eventually we exited that company, to a publicly traded company at that point, Cision, around 50 million AR. Then I kind of redid the whole thing. Basically was the CRO of another SaaS scale up. And we sold that one also within the first 1.5 years to Xero, the accounting software. And basically kind of those two experiences, being the CRO, really managing marketing, sales, CS, but from a RevOps perspective, I think that's kind of a unique twist. And I think that specific angle then has also sparked the idea of building Growblocks with everything that comes with it.
That's awesome, Toni. All right. Well, you talk to a lot of companies. So maybe we'll start with telling us a little bit about what are the changes that you're seeing in revenue operations today?
Yeah. So I think number one, revenue operations, for folks that don't know that yet, really is an evolution step beyond sales operations. So sales operation very focused on the sales team and the CRM and trying to work efficiencies and in that function. Revenue operation, at least in its idea, is trying to go one step further up, really looking across marketing, sales, and CS, and trying to understand how the whole go-to-market engine actually works together and functions. And the changes that are really happening on the revenue operations side is that more and more, I would say, senior folks in that role start to detach themselves from merely being system administrators and thinking really about the CRM, and is it Salesforce or the HubSpot, or is it Marketo or HubSpot on the marketing automation? Kind of those topics start to blend a little bit further into the background, kind of the leading RevOps teams. And they're starting to think way more about, okay, how can I optimize the whole go-to-market engine in itself, right? And how can I either drive more revenue for an organization? How can I potentially reduce costs? Or how I can do both at the same time, right? And that's really the evolution where revenue operations wants to go as a tribe, if you will. I think only very few teams end up there right now, but that's really kind of the trajectory that I'm seeing a lot. And I see a lot of hunger from CEOs, CROs to hire those profiles to help them along on that journey, right? Because that data-driven approach into the go-to-market engine, I think it's still lacking in most organizations.
And Toni, one of the things I love about what you bring to the industry and what you bring to Growblocks, that capability of seeing it from the CRO side and bringing it into the RevOps side as well. And there's probably nothing in my mind more powerful than your background than maybe the other way around. Someone who's in a CRO role that has RevOps experience today. So that's where I think a lot of the added impact and productivity you bring to the market comes to play. Could you share a specific example of how cost cutting in these circumstances may have had unintended consequences as well.
Yeah. So this is really a thing that unfolded over the last 1 or 2 years, right? During the probably what we will refer to, if we're not already doing this, the SaaS recession, basically. And I think what we have seen there across the board is that yes, your top line was breaking in or was not growing as you wanted to. Yes, the funding market wasn't as liquid anymore. So how did many organizations react? They reacted by indiscriminate cost cutting across the board, right? So, and I think we've all been part of that, either being affected by it or being, in the room when it happened, building that list. But it usually is a conversation where it goes like, okay, we need to overall do 40%. So everyone here in the room needs to now contribute 40%, right? Kind of that's usually how that conversation goes. But that's not the smart way to do it. And the simple reason is, if you do indiscriminately across the board, if you execute a cost cutting in your go-to-market, marketing, sales, CS, everyone needs to share 40%, let's just say. What you will be doing is, yes, you will reduce your cost footprint, but more than likely you will also reduce your ability to generate revenue by 40%. So overall, your efficiency actually stayed the same, right? You reduced 40% on both sides. So where revenue operations actually has come in the past, and I think will so also going forward on those topics, is to try and understand not how we cut 40%, but where should we actually cut that? Let's just kind of go about it in a way where we understand what are the most efficient funnels we have, what are the most efficient regions we have, what are the most efficient segments we have, and let's actually try and give more money to them, or at least not cut there, and instead cut more than 40%, maybe even 100%, for things that are going on in your funnel that are actually not working out, right? And that would have been a better way to go about this. Very few teams have been able to execute it like this. And I think there was also a lot of time pressure. And don't get me wrong. I mean, everyone has been doing their best work, obviously trying to achieve that. But those are things in terms of cost cutting that I've seen across folks that I talk to and our customer base. Initially that was kind of, a bit of a mistake, kind of realizing that, okay, we need to reduce the burn. Let's do it indiscriminately across the board instead of being smart about it and trying to figure out what are the better areas to cut versus what are the worst ones.
Toni, I want to dive a little deeper on this concept that you just brought up around monitoring efficiency. It's a complicated concept, and I've heard you you have this great analogy around factories and their operating model and how we can apply it to the B2B SaaS space. So maybe you can explain that for our audience.
So, and I unfortunately can't take credit. There's some other thought leaders in the space that decided to kind of popularize the factory idea here. But ultimately, I think what's really helpful is to think of your go-to-market, of your commercial teams, of your revenue teams, however you refer to them, right? The marketing, sales, and customer success or service teams. Think about what they're doing as being different parts of a factory that has the output being revenue. Yeah. And once you start thinking about this, right, the first thing that happens, like, okay, I probably have different factory lanes at the same time, right? I have one factory lane that's maybe outbound and another one that's maybe inbound. Or I have a factory lane that's the US and international. Or I have the mid-market versus the SMB versus the enterprise segment. Kind of all of those, you can think of them as different factory lanes. And then, as a next step, you then realize, okay, how does a factory actually work, right? You have different workbenches along those lanes, right? And those are filled by folks. You have your CSMs, you have your AEs, you have your SDRs, you have your marketing people. And really then, realizing, okay, first of all, we need to make sure that they are correctly staffed, so enough of them here, but also that there's enough flow coming through, right? And just as an example, many folks have kind of made that mistake over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years and kind of is changing now, equating more revenue with more AEs. So we just need to bring in more account executives and we will get more money. Easy peasy, right? That works really well in the financial, spreadsheet that people are running. But once you apply that logic to a factory, you kind of are realizing, wait a minute, this account executive is actually only filling one workbench here in the factory lane. And if there are no parts flowing to the AE, he can't or she can't assemble it into, I don't know, a car or something like that. I'm running out of analogy here, but that's actually kind of then the realization. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, maybe we have too many account executives because there are just not enough parts coming through. Maybe the reason why the factory lane isn't producing enough is actually that we're not getting, producing enough parts in the early beginning versus what the AE is doing here, right? And once you start thinking about, the way you create revenue like this, I think your mind opens up to a new way of thinking about this in general, right? And then overall, what you also want to know is like, well, okay, let's just say I have a fairly simple business still. I do inbound, outbound partners, and I'm operating in 2 different markets, right? Really what you're having now, you have 6 separate factory lanes. That's actually what's happening. You have 6 separate factory lanes here. And what you will need to do, and this is almost going back to the cost cutting thing, is you would for each of them need to figure out what is the CAC payback for all of them, right? Because each lane needs to be, efficient individually. You can't have one really great one subsidizing for the other one. That shouldn't work like that, right? If that's a strategic move, that makes sense. You have that in the early beginnings of a new market. It's way more expensive than some of the more mature ones. But once you realize that you actually need to look at those 6 lanes independently, and if stuff isn't working, you either need to fix it or cut it away. Suddenly you realize like that way of thinking about you producing revenue, that it's actually a factory floor, and thinking about it like this, it makes a bunch of decisions and way to maneuver much easier, I believe.
Yeah, I think Tony, I think companies are doing this, but they're doing it really ad hoc. It's like a point in time. Oh my God, let's get this report going and let's analyze how we're performing in this particular area. And I think when we think about best practices and what good looks like today, it's a continuum, right? It's a never ending process.
Yes. So think about it like this, right? If you walk into an actual factory, like an actual, that's built in 2024 or is operating in 2024, do you think that they're monitoring and observing this whole thing in an Excel spreadsheet that someone fills out once in a while? It's just not the case, right? Kind of the sophistication that these people are having there is so much ahead of what the revenue teams are doing right now. It's pretty insane, right? And they want to know, okay, I had this case kind of recently, and this was a super switched on guy, by the way. Was a CRO, and they saw that their sales cycles were dragging out by 10 days or something like this, right? Kind of they measured that, and they saw it was dragging out. And what then he immediately realized, okay, sales cycles dragging out by 10 days, that is actually going to create now a capacity issue for me, because my AEs can't get quote unquote rid of those deals fast enough. So suddenly they're sitting there with more deals, right? And conversely, so he had a surge of inbounds. Everyone listening to this surge of inbounds, what is bad about that? The thing is, it was too much capacity actually for the reps to work through, and it was a real problem for him, right? Kind of he, the CEO, everyone jumped suddenly on sales calls in order to work through that. That level of inside observability and understanding what's going on, kind of that is where everyone should be moving towards, because otherwise that would have led to lost deals, slack in the system, basically. That is real money at the end of the day, right? And that is where I believe the best practice is going to move, instead of an ad hoc after the fact QBR. Quarters already missed, and now we're trying to figure out why it was missed. No, you couldn't see this actually when it's happening. And our claim to fame is that you can even see this ahead of time. You can even see this a month and a couple of months before it actually happens, so you have enough time to react.
Yeah, and Toni, that is really where the power of metrics come into play, and how important it is, to be able to leverage these indicators earlier on. So, if you can talk a little bit about how metrics and indicators come into play within the RevOps community as you describe it, And then what's changing in 2024? Are there new capabilities or new areas that you're able to lever that you have a lot of excitement about going forward?
Yeah. So I think one main takeaway, if you only stay on the metrics level for a second, and then the exciting stuff afterwards, kind of on the metrics level, it's really important to, not calculate metrics because your VC and your board wants it, right? I think they can give you great direction. I think if they ask you about CAC payback, they're trying actually to get you to calculate it. But just knowing what your overall CAC payback number is actually not helpful operationally. You would need to kind of break it down further in order to, use it for decision making, right? And there's so many other kind of things around that. I think the other piece is if you look at a metric to be a leading indicator, it really needs to mean for you that if the metric is going outside of a band that you're comfortable with, by the way, that also requires you to set goals and bands and all of that stuff. But if it's going outside of that, it actually has to trigger action for you and your organization. If you're looking at a quote unquote leading indicator and it's going south, not in the right way, and you're just like, okay, well, then we'll just wait, then it's not a leading indicator. Then you're better off not even looking at this, right? So really good teams almost have like different plans in a drawer. Okay, if this happens, what are the three options we can do about this, right? What I'm really excited about in terms of 2024 is, and now we're kind of taking some of the different areas kind of into one topic almost, is you have this factory, and then what are really sophisticated folks doing with actual factories? Well, they can't actually afford to just look at things as they are and wait until something breaks and then go in and fix it, right? And there's one really cool example. It's windmill farms or windmills, for example, right? And what, the problem with that is they might be offshore, they might be hard to access, they're pretty expensive. They're like $1-2 million to run, right? There's a lifetime, obviously, to them to kind of return the cash. There are many things that can go wrong. And what organizations are doing that running that, they're basically creating a digital twin of that windmill. And then they're kind of, what they're using this for is like, sure, they can see, what the expected lifetime value of that windmill is. I think they can do it in an Excel spreadsheet. That's not the trick. The trick is you have all of those thousands of windmills across the country, and you have the weather changing. You have different things impacting this in a good and a bad way. And the digital twin basically tries and predict how that will impact, yes, your financial income coming out of that windmill, but also how the windmill should be behaving. What's now really interesting is when then the actual data comes in and they see that the windmill isn't behaving like this then gives them a couple of clues. First of all, is there something to learn here? Is it a positive thing, right? Maybe this is spinning too much and maybe it's a negative thing. But the other piece is also, okay, based on this behavior now, I can send out a crew to fix this specific windmill in the middle of, I don't know, the Pacific, somewhere. And you can be reasonably sure that something is wrong with that windmill, but it hasn't broken yet. So you can be proactive in your approach, right? And that digital twinning is actually something that's been not only used with like boring windmills. Why is Tony talking about windmills here? But it's also being used by Formula One cars. I mean, this is a thing that's getting a lot more traction in the US. It's used with the America's Cup, kind of the sailboat competition, right? Kind of that's a biggie, and it's used across the board. I mean, basically, NASA did this in the 60s. It wasn't quite a digital twin; it was a physical twin that they actually used in order to figure out, what are the resources the actual spaceship has available in order to fix issues, right? And what's really cool is you take that concept, apply that to your go-to-market, to your revenue engine, and suddenly you have a completely level of insight, which you then can couple with some of the extremely new stuff, which is, generative AI, right? Kind of and we're not that far away, and I can tell you because my engineering team is working on this, is to have the digital twin and then have generative AI on top of it, and kind of that can basically tell you, hey, something over there is going wrong. Here are 3 things you can do to fix it. And those things will be fail and miss sometimes, and hit and miss sometimes, and kind of not perfect. Kind of that will evolve over time. But we're already at that point, right, where we can basically have generative AI help you steer your engine and make sure that you're running this most efficiently, you're running most predictably, and so forth. Which are it's buzzwords, but they're kind of key in this current environment. And it's a lot of people are asking for that stuff, right? And I think on the technological side, we're kind of inching closer and closer to an area where that is actually absolutely possible.
So, Toni, can we take you back a little more to your personal journey and take us deeper into how you've recognized the importance of revenue observability in the go-to-market funnel, and what drove you to start Growblocks?
Yeah.
We'd love for you to just elaborate on the main market problems you saw then, and how that your firm is diving deep into those problems and solving them for your clients as well.
So the aha moment for me personally around this problem really was a situation in 2016. I want to say we just raised the Series B. We were burning $1 million and more dollars a month. We were hitting the cost targets. We were not hitting the revenue targets. Kind of the typical thing, basically, right? And there was kind of a fairly straight up crisis in the organization. It was like we either make it or we're gonna die now. And what the team around me and myself, kind of what we built was this first, digital twin is a very big word for this, but kind of this model of how this could work. And what we realized was, number one, yes, AEs is not actually what's driving revenue. It's actually the opportunities being generated. We were about to let go of the whole SDR team because, hey, those are just 20-something-year-olds surfing Facebook all day long back then. Now it's different. And hey, let's put some more money into marketing. So, and we did some of those calculations that I just talked through, and we realized, okay, we have too many E's. Actually, SDR is the most efficient channel we have, and marketing is extremely bloated. So what we then did in order to kind of fix the whole organization, we went from a 24-month CaC payback, which back then was a lot. Then there was a time where it's not a lot anymore. No, it's a lot again. And we did the whole re-engineering, reduced the AE team. We basically cut back the marketing team by half. We put most of that money into building out the SDR function. And we went from a CaC payback of 24 down to 12, like in the matter of, I think, 2 quarters, which is a crazy number, by the way. And at the same time, we were hitting the exact targets we said we're going to hit, which was great for the board that suddenly got confidence again in what we're doing, so we're not all amateurs. And we then continued to hit 12 quarters in a row, right? 12 quarters in a row, that predictability. And again, it's not that we were guessing the number, right? Kind of there's kind of a back and forth between understanding that there's an obstacle coming up and then taking all the different resources you have available in order to overcome that obstacle, right? You can find revenue from so many places in your bow tie, in your revenue engine, in your revenue factory, whatever you want to do, use here, and kind of figured it out and kind of got there, right? And then the realization was like, wait a minute, this is an extremely powerful way of running your SaaS business, and honestly, any business. And I know that Kat had some similar experience as well, by the way. Maybe she wants to share some of that. But basically kind of, seeing how difficult it is to execute this, seeing how even if you have the knowledge of how to do it, running it in a spreadsheet and kind of how prone to error it is, and how not accessible it is to the actual decision makers around the table that really need to kind of have that insight, was then one of the starting points for us to kind of go and build out this piece of software to help folks to not have those issues in the first place that we experience, but if they do have those issues, kind of break through them and steer the ship in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think back at our experience at Jelly Smack and trying to build out this kind of observability model manually, the amount of resources and people and systems that it took to do this was really intensive, and it took a while. And I don't think we even built out the full funnel observability. We really focused on the middle part of it.
Yeah.
But in my defense, a couple of years ago, there were no SaaS vendors in this market. I don't think people were thinking this way. You mentioned kind of that SaaS recession, and it's really, a couple of things that have happened. First of all, I think people are understanding the importance of the data they're sitting on, that it's truly a gold mine, and if it's leveraged efficiently, there's a lot of insights that can be had there. And there are people thinking about this problem, and the industry is responding. Growblocks obviously being one of them, kind of thinking about how do we bring this to the companies, to the masses, that
Yeah.
they are able to do this in a more efficient way.
Yeah, absolutely.